Hello Biotechnicans. This is Dr. Zamir from Biotecnika Bangalore. So we get constant queries from all our interns and our viewers saying that, sir, how do I do a review of literature? Tell me the steps of a systematic review of literature. So in this video, we will mainly dwell upon the steps which are involved in review of literature. Okay, let's try to look into it. So welcome back. So the review of literature becomes a very important component of your research paper or your thesis or dissertation. Now, there should be a proper differentiation between the introduction, the background, the rationale of the study, and very importantly, the review of literature. Now, this review of literature is one major component which actually bridges the gap between what is being done and what has to be done. So we need to write it in a much more critical way so that the reader gets interested or gets tempted to read the entire article rather than getting frustrated. Now, for writing an effective review of literature, here there are few key points. The first thing is, remember, we are not summarizing things, because there's a common notion among all the researchers saying that, you collect around 50 to 100 articles and then take one line from, or take some important sentences from the already published data and then you frame your own review of literature. It's a big no-no, because this can lead into plagiarism. This can also lead into certain legalities issues, and also very importantly, this is mere copying. So please do not do the copy paste job. So what we need to do is read an entire paper and write as far as possible, start writing review of literature onto a paper and not onto the computer. So when you do onto the paper, you just make sure that you write the gist of the story, and this gist of the story should be able to comprehend the question, that is the rationale which your review is trying to address. So hence, these are the few important points what we need to remember when we are trying to do a review of literature. So remember, the body of the text should be very, very critically written with the crucial points which will actually impart knowledge and which can bridge the previous knowledge with that of the current status of the article. And also remember, it should be a comprehensive survey. So do not just take few articles on a superficial level, or there's a new style wherein you just take last 2 years or 3 years review of literature or published articles and then try to write a new review. Again, you're not summarizing things. You are trying to put up your idea, and hence writing a review of literature becomes very, very crucial and should be very effective. And certain times you can also use certain non-quantitative summary of the existing data, which can also add value onto your review of literature. This could be either quantitative or it could be qualitative data. Now, once you have the entire component ready, you need to also know how to interpret the data, because a previous data which talks about the major findings has to be interpreted, and you should see whether your viewpoint aligns with the interpretation which has been already given by the researcher, and whether it gets deviated from the data which is already been given by the previous researcher. So it is not always necessary that you need to agree with the previous published literature. You can always give your viewpoints with a substantial explanation and justification. So please remember, the process of documentation should be very, very relevant to the current scenario, and also should give a meaningful interpretation for what you are trying to justify. Now, let us try to look into what is the purpose of the review of literature. So these are few important purposes in which a review of literature plays a very, very important role. You should always see what is your review talking about, and how is it different from the already available literature. So the already existing literature your review of literature should add value to the already existing literature. And please remember, in the available data, you should always find the gaps or the lacunae which are present in the literature, and this will add value to your writing. Always also look into what are the other people trying to do, what are the other researchers trying to do in the same field, and identify the major breakthrough work or cutting edge research which has changed the entire paradigm of that particular research field. So this becomes very, very crucial, and you need to cite this classical literature which has actually brought a U-turn in the thinking of a given concept. And very importantly, it can also include certain methodologies and research techniques only if it has been necessary. And if you're talking something on new methodologies of cell therapy or new methodologies of CRISPR, okay, or subjects like this which can add value onto your review of literature. And very importantly, you can also talk about the various theories, their conclusions, their inferences, and their ideas, which can also bring value to your review of literature. And always remember, provide a context for your own research. So you should always say that this is the work which has been already done, and this is what I think I want to envisage through this particular review. So it becomes very, very important that you put up your ideas so that the reader actually appreciates the hard work what you have done, which actually bridges the data from the data which is already available and the data which is present and which can connect to the future. Then we should also look into the way you try to interpret things. So the interpretation of the existing literature also becomes very, very crucial. And also the contradictions, I was trying to tell you, the contradiction of thoughts can always happen. So it is not always necessary, because one classical example is your heliocentric system and geocentric system. So not everybody agreed with geocentric system, or not everybody agreed with the heliocentric system. So the refutation, the debating should happen with the contradiction of the thoughts what people have already said and what you are trying to think. And this can create a breakthrough, a revolution in terms of the subject, and also in terms of citation. This can actually increase the higher amount of citation when you are trying to give a breakthrough thought. And very importantly, indicate the current research place and the schema in a particular field. So it is always important to give a schema, and also it is important that you stick on to this schema, because many a times when we write a review of literature, it is always distracting. The amount of data which is available is in such a huge quantum that many a times we go into a bhadkau mode, we go on to a distractive mode. So it is very important that I need to stick on to the schema. I should know where to start, what is the body, and where should I end, by putting up a question which can actually define the next part of my research work. And again, how best I can actually gap and scrutinize the research gaps between the initial work and the future work which could be conducted by your lab or by other researchers. Then also you should know the latest impact of the research work, what has been published and what your paper can actually envisage. And very, very importantly, you need to always make sure that you are a bridge. Your review of literature should be a bridge between the data which has been already been present onto the database, or which has already been deposited, and then what new things can be, the future prospects which can come into the picture. So it becomes very, very important in science that you give the entire arena, you give the entire saga of the review of literature. Now, the next question is how to write a review of literature. Again, very, very important. So these are the 5 major steps which a researcher has to follow to write an effective review of literature. The first the step is search for the relevant literature. If you look into our previous videos, we have also created a content on how to search for a relevant literature using keywords, and how using filters. And we always work on a particular mantra when we are actually working on review of literature, that is garbage in is garbage out. So just make sure you always use a specific query, you always use a specific keyword. So only with a specific keyword you have a specific output. Otherwise, the quantum of data the database presents to you is so confusing that many a time the things goes on dilution. So, searching for a relevant review of literature becomes the first step. So once you search the relevant review of literature, then evaluate the source, because Google, if you're trying to look into Google, Google will give all the relevant literature, but you should know the authentication of the sources. So it is always better you go on to the international, pre-reviewed publishers, wherein you can authenticate the data, evaluate the data. The third important step is identify the theme. So when you start your review, make sure you identify the theme, and this theme has to, if you are going for a publication, this theme has to go into the alignment of the aim and objectives or the aim and scope of the journal. Otherwise, you might be writing a beautiful review, but on the way, since it does not fit into this, aim and scope of the journal, many a times your comprehensive review gets rejected. So identify the themes, and also debate. When you're writing a review, debate on the gaps and the acceptance of the paradigm or the theories which are actually been said, or what you want to reframe it in a different view. So the next part is outline the structure. Very, very, very important, because only when you have a framework you'll be able to write an effective review. As I was trying to tell you, writing a review of literature is the most destructive part, because when I start reading, I get tempted and I need to write, I want to put, 100 or 150 articles just in the review of literature, because nobody will publish my, comprehensive review of 100, 150 research papers. So it becomes very, very important to look into what are the papers which are cited, what are the papers which are cross-cited, and how do I make the entire utility of these two components so that my review becomes much more effective. Once you have all this material, the next thing is, start writing a review. Now, since many times I always say that, adapting technology into writing a review becomes much more easier. Now, if you are well versed with the machine learning languages, so you can always adapt the machine learning languages to filter out the effective review of literatures. Or there's a beautiful tool or a beautiful package which is called as NVivo. So NVivo also becomes much more handy in actually creating an effective review of literature. This gives you, word matrix. This gives you the word cloud. This gives you the author list. This everything will come into a quantitative level. So understanding and writing a metadata analysis becomes much more easier. I would request everybody to try on NVivo, at least the trial version. Once I have started to write a review, so, how do I actually, refix the way I write? How do I revive the way I write? So there are few things or few very important objectives. So I would say there are 5 important objectives wherein you need to keep in mind when you are writing a review of literature. The first thing is, motivate your work by explaining the social value, because, we as scientists, we have a drawback. Many times we try to write it in such a hi-fi scientific terminology that the common layman does not understand. So do not make this particular mistake. Make sure that your work has been very clearly envisaged, which has been very clearly delivered to the layman, wherein the societal value is being created. The second point is provide a background for your context for the reader, because the reader should know, why should I read this particular literature? What is the importance of this particular literature? Now, if you look into, with the past pandemic, there's a huge amount of, there is a tons and tons of data on COVID, but which data is much more relevant? Why should I read this particular data? This creates a curiosity, and only certain effective review of literatures can actually, make sure the reader would read it. And then, if possible, there is a societal significance and there is a scientific significance to your review of paper. Always, the third point is always try to compare your findings with the other researchers. So we as scientists, our research is always, very close to our heart. It is, we are emotionally bound to it, but never be too much of emotional to your data, because emotionally you cannot debate. So you need to be always practical when you are trying to debate with your data with the other research findings. Then always try to justify your review of literature with the available various technologies and experimental methods which can justify your argument. Then communicate your research projects or the scientific projects in terms of their novelty, and also try to frame the research gap. So when you're trying to define the novelty and the research gap, this is the gist of the entire review of literature, which will give a meaningful component to the manuscript or to your thesis or dissertation. Now, what are the various steps? So these are the 6 various steps which a review of literature should follow. The first step is select an effective title. So, when you are selecting this is very, very crucial. You should know why are you selecting this particular title, what is the societal importance and what is the scientific importance of this particular title. And if there is a special call from any of these journals, you should also make sure whether your title actually suits that particular journal or that special edition. Then, once you select the title or the topic, then search for effective literature by using various keywords. Then once you have searched, once you have collected all the literature, then try to develop an argument. So developing an argument becomes very, very important. So this will create the rationale of your study. Once you create that argument, again do a proper survey so that the literature becomes, your review of literature becomes much more concrete. Once you have done this, have a constant critic. Okay, critically you need to analyze that, whatever argument you are trying to envisage, or if you are trying to lay down, you need to make sure that there should be a proper critical component which can explain the rationale of the study. And finally, start writing your review. So these are the steps in which you write your review of article. Now, this is again, I say, as another mantra or another formula, and this formula talks about 5 W's and 1 H. Okay, so this 5 W's is why, when, who, what, where are 5 W's, and then H is how. So here we need to apply this when we are actually writing a review of literature. It is not necessary that you apply all the 5 W's at one shot, but on the way, if you are able to effectively use at least 3 to 4 W's and 1 H, this can also give a lot of emphasis, a lot of insights on writing a review of literature. Example, okay, when I ask a why question, like the context and the research project, why should I write this? So you should have an answer to this. When should I write it? So what should be the purpose, or on which phase of the training component am I writing on? Okay, or who, that is, whether I am talking on the partnership, or whether I am talking about the mentorship, whether I am talking about a particular technique. So all this comes into a picture. Then what? The selection of the topic, okay, and then article style, because we'll make a separate video on various kinds of articles which are available, and that is how you can approach the journal or the publisher to publish your article. Then how do I do it? So I do it with a proper literature survey, or I can use various kinds of organizational tools, or I can start writing the draft in a stepwise manner, and very, very importantly, I start editing it. Then where should I publish? So if you are a renowned scientist, say for example, you have put around 10 to 15 years of research, then the publishers will identify you, the editors will identify you and start inviting you. And these kind of reviews are called as invited reviews. But if you are a fresher and if you are just beginning your career after your PhD or a postdoc, then this becomes very important, wherein there are certain journals which actually publishes certain review articles. So you, without an invitation, you can approach the journal, wherein the aim and scope of the journal matches with your title of your review. So only under these conditions a review has been accepted. Then what are the guidelines for writing a proper review? So these are the various sets of guidelines. Let us try to talk about one or two very, very crucial guidelines. The first guidelines is you need to remember to cite properly. Now, many a times, because the voracity of the data, the vastness of the data, what people they try to do is they pick one or two sentences and then in a bracket they say, Zamir et al, or they put up a number as per the format. But on the way, do not make this particular mistake. Only select those crucial articles which can actually make a difference in your review. So don't add references just for the sake of increasing the number of references, but always make sure your review of literature should have a beautiful start and a beautiful end. And for this, your current data and your previous data should be supportive in such a way that you create a strong review of literature. Then again, you need to also look into whether the articles what you are citing, the published literature what you are citing, whether they come from good publishers, whether it is Scopus indexed, whether it is pre-reviewed. Okay, all these and the bibliographies has to be looked carefully looked, and many a times the recent 3 years or recent 5 years of data could be always included, because later to it, you can always refer it as a cross references. So make sure you present your problem in a well established and much clearer way. And very, very important, do not get biased. Okay, do not get biased, because when we are writing a literature, as I was trying to tell you, we are too emotional with our research. So we getting biased with the data becomes a normal circumstances. So just make sure do not get biased with your data. So hence, these are the 5 things which I want you people to remember. That is, maintain the originality of the work, and very importantly, the methodology and its credibility of the review has to be looked into very carefully. And then the objectivity of the authors. So what are the objective of you writing this particular review becomes very, very important. And then what was your argument when you have started this particular review? What was your argument, and do you justify your argument in that review makes very, very important. And then at the end, the significance, that is whether the entire review create a paradigm shift, okay, in terms of societal significance, in terms of social significance, even for a layman. Okay, if your review of literature is able to add on knowledge, I think your purpose of writing a review has been sufficed. Now again, there's a confusion. So when we are writing a review, certain point of time, please remember, review is not an extension of introduction. So many a times, students, or when I review, I see that there is a spillover of introduction into review of literature, and there is a spillover of review of literature into introduction. So what I thought is, let me try to differentiate these components into the components which should come under introduction and the components which should come under discussion of a review of literature. So please remember, in terms of introduction, use the previous literature and introduce your research. So do not try to get into an argument when you are talking about introduction. But however, when you are trying to discuss, use the previous studies to explain and reinforce your findings. So this becomes very important. You can debate in terms of discussion, but when you are trying to introduce in the component of introduction, do not try to debate or get into an argument. Then try to be very specific when you are trying to discuss in your introduction. So subject-specific literature should be very, very important. I can still say that, 1 or 2 lines of general introduction is still permitted, but as far as possible, try to be subject-specific. But on the way, the so defined subject has to be argued, has to be debated at the end, so that you actually hit the particular topic with a particular target audience. So this also becomes very, very crucial. Then identify the knowledge gaps with the previous literature, and this gap has to be mentioned in your introduction. However, do not cite review articles unless and until it is actually necessary in your discussion part. Now, just for the sake of increasing the numbers, please do not cite. So just make sure these components you remember, and there should not be spillovers from introduction to review, review to introduction, or even in terms of discussion when you're writing an original article. So at last, I just wanted you people to remember that, when do I know that I have been done? I know my review of literature is complete. So if you have identified the research gap, and if you feel that the research gap has been properly addressed, that is one point that you can feel contented and say that yes, I have actually touched my end of review of literature. And very importantly, if you have validated your references, you have, if you have looked into the proper references, proper formatted references from an authenticated source, so that this is supporting your argument either in an alignment with your topic or towards a deviation of the previous literature which has been found, that is also an indication that you have come to a end of your review. And very, very important, have a relevant study which has been included, and you should always know when to start and when to finish. So don't bring multiple arguments. So as far as possible, do not exceed more than 3 arguments in one review of literature, because more than 3 becomes too much hectic for a reader to understand. So with this, I hope that and I'm very sure that you have got certain insights on how exactly a review of literature has to be written. So thank you very much, all biotechnicians, and I feel that this knowledge of how to write a comprehensive review with various tools and softwares is actually helpful for you, so that we would look upon for your comments, and we would also seek your suggestions, so that we can create more content for you, so that you can write your theses, you can write your manuscripts much more effectively. Thank you very much. Stay connected.